Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Second Party Podcast. A little while back, I replied to a tweet from someone who was talking about money and happiness. They said, when people say money doesn't buy happiness, it's like they've never worked their whole adult life to be able to let their kids lose at the Scholastic Book Fair with reckless abandon. I don't care about status. I want my kid to feel safe buying 3 Babysitters Club books and a poster. And I kind of jokingly replied with some lyrics to an old Logic song called Young Jedi. The lyric says, money can't buy happiness, but that ish can support it, 'cause what's a family of 5 if you can't even afford it?
He said that ish.
It's censored for the podcast. And it kind of got me thinking about rap in general and how I think it's similar to comedy in that it tends to be on kind of the bleeding edge of thought, right? It's towing that line between what is and what isn't acceptable to say. And it's able to push up against some of those barriers that people are afraid to cross in their day-to-day lives for fear of, violating one of these cultural rules of, not being politically correct. And interestingly enough, I saw a tweet recently where someone was talking about how men who lead women on and don't end up marrying them are really doing themselves, and the women a disservice. And somebody replied very simply, in the wise words of Beyonce, if you like it, then you should have put a ring on it. And I feel like so often you have these ideas that come through in comedy and in rap and in some of these more bleeding edge art forms. And because it's done in an artistic way, you can kind of push those bounds a little bit more.
Well, I think about Ill Mind of Hopsin, that rap song. I don't know which number it is because
I think you're referring to 5.
Okay, I remember that was one of the first rap songs that you kind of showed me years and years ago, and
yeah,
I didn't really get it. I don't know. I wasn't listening to the lyrics.
Mm-hmm.
I was just kind of listening to the sound of it, I guess.
Well, and he swears in it, so I think you were a little,
I don't know,
put off because there are swear words.
I don't know. You calling me a prude? Is that what you're saying?
At the time, yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
I've been corrupted, don't worry. But
when was the first time you heard about that? When you heard that song? Was that in the car with your mom?
Yeah.
When I played?
Yeah. We were driving back from, it was like a cross-country summer camp. I don't know what it was. My mom had picked us up, a group of people, and you and I were both in the car.
Mm-hmm.
And we were just playing music in the car, and you played this song, and I was just like, this is not appropriate.
Well, but I grew up with a very different mentality with things like that, where in the household that I grew up in, it wasn't so much about what words were said, right? If it's a swear word or not. It was more about the meaning of it. So I think my parents would balk more at, a Whistle by Flo Rida than they would at Ill Mind of Hopsin, because one is elevating something negative while the other one's elevating something positive. The way that you go about it doesn't matter so much.
I know. I understand that. I'm just saying, I remember hearing that song for the first time. I did not grow up around rap at all. Rap to me was Toby Mac. And so
oh boy. Okay.
So I don't know. I wasn't familiar with the genre of music really, but you have always been really into rap, and so since we've been together, I've listened to it a lot more, and I'd say I've grown to have an appreciation for it. There's some rap that I really do like. Mm-hmm. I'm more selective about what I like than you are in the rap genre, but my point is, songs like Ill Mind of Hopsin and, stuff from Logic, stuff from Kanye, if you really listen to the lyrics in some of these songs, they're talking about tough stuff. Like they're really getting into the weeds on topics that maybe people don't talk about that much. And sometimes they have really interesting ideas in there and kind of profound ways of talking about things.
Yeah.
I mean, there's rap that's really shallow too, for sure.
Yeah, of course.
That's probably most of it, but you get some of those really good rap artists, and there's I don't know, there's some thought and depth to it that's there sometimes.
Yeah. I don't know that I'd put Logic in that camp, but yeah, I think
Maybe some of his older stuff. You started by quoting Logic.
well, that was just one that had come to mind.
Logic is kind of crashed and burned now, I think.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
But
I feel like the rap genre in particular is a mode of art that is so often denigrated.
well, yeah, you got people like Ben Shapiro saying it's not music, right?
Yeah, come on. It totally is.
I mean, I don't know how much
argument is terrible,
he's joking about that.
I
don't
think
know.
to some degree he is. And people take it a little too seriously. But
I'm in a very different perspective than you because I understand that view of rap because I had it for a long time. I never listened to rap. I thought it was just kind of like dumb, gross music. They're always swearing. I didn't really think that there was depth to rap at all.
Mm-hmm.
But I never really stopped and listened to good rap.
yeah, I mean, my thing with art in general is I want to see people push the bounds of what's possible. Like Jordan Peterson kind of talks about this a bit, where like art is supposed to express things that we can't express with mere words, and it does it in this highly efficient, oftentimes better way than you could with mere words. And I feel like to really be doing that, to get to that zone where there are things that we can't write out in an essay and fully capture, you have to be, like I kind of said, like pushing those bounds, being on the bleeding edge. And this is something that can be done in all sorts of different forms of art. It can be done in all different genres of music. But I feel like, at least nowadays, oftentimes when it comes to pop or most other genres outside of rap, like particularly in Christian music, people are not pushing the bounds. Like I love hearing someone just give a song their all, like belting it out all in. And I think too often the Christian music industry has this like production and this like sterilization. It's like we're trying to keep everything within these bounds of acceptability. And something I love with rap,
clean and happy, and
yeah,
very vanilla, standard, appealing to the masses.
yeah. And I feel like rap has so much emotion to it. It's people talking about like really serious, tough things and horrific experiences that they've had, right? Like, oh, my brother got shot and was killed and I was like 5. Like, that's the kind of stuff that we're talking about. And then how does this person cope with that? That is frequently the type of theme that's seen in rap music versus in other types of music, particularly Christian stuff. I just feel like it's so watered down and it's lacking in that passion.
Well, even secular pop music is so shallow these days. I feel like they're never really talking about anything. It's just love and sex and a girl and a relationship or me, my life. Like I don't know. Pop music is arguably more shallow as a whole than rap music.
Yeah, I mean,
at least
they're
talking about something.
Yeah, I agree. Like, while some art nowadays is kind of getting stale, like the the pop music side of things, I do think that there's still great art being made. It's maybe
Yeah.
more difficult to find because I'm in no way saying, oh, all rap music falls into this category. But I do think that some rap music certainly does. And it really ends up pushing the bounds of things and ends up being something that I think is so well expressed. Like when you have a piece of art that perfectly encapsulates an idea, I think that it becomes something that you can like reference, right? Like there's a reason why certain movies, certain scenes are referenced all the time. It's because they're taking some complex idea and they're boiling it down. And I think that part of the reason we reference those things in an argument is because it's almost like a shorthand.
It's sometimes a more efficient way to illustrate a point or to get a point across. Like you can communicate so much with art
Yeah.
that you can't communicate other ways.
Yeah. And I think maybe this is going to sound a little weird, but I think rap in particular, I oftentimes see many parallels to certain things in philosophy. Not like super hyper deep, like argumentative philosophy, but I do think that there are that sometimes rap and philosophy are like two sides of the same coin.
In what way? Just like they're pondering life and its meaning and the reason for things.
Yeah, in part, it's dealing with a lot of like emotional struggles. There's also definitely a heavy emphasis on like psychology, right? Maybe psychology is a better parallel, but like okay, here's an example. One of the rules in Jordan Peterson's book is do not try to rescue someone who does not want to be rescued. Okay, he's got a whole section of the book, a lengthy chapter devoted to this, explaining some of the rationale and referencing a variety of things. But this concept has come up in rap music time and time again as well. Like it's explored by J. Cole on one of his hit tracks, No Role Models, when he says, she don't want to be saved, don't save her. And this is kind of hearkening back to E40's 1994 track titled Captain Save a Ho. Okay?
This is why people don't take it seriously.
But in the end, what they're saying is, okay, you have a bunch of people and they're not taking the necessary steps in their life. And if you go in and you try and save this person, you are not going to be able to, first off. And there are a variety of reasons why. One, people need to put in effort themselves. Two, it's very difficult to have people change. And they need to do it on their own volition. Like I think it's Dr. Dre, in one of his songs said, you can't make a hoe a housewife. Now, I'm not endorsing the use of language here, okay? But similar sentiments of like, hey, don't be expecting somebody to change all of a sudden just when, their situation changes. Like, no, their habits, their abilities, their current situation is going to inform what they do going forward.
Well, the whole song, Ill Mind of Hopsin, whatever the one I'm thinking about is, whatever number, it's kind of like a big, I don't know what you want to say, like rebuke to people who are living terribly, like
Yeah.
rebuking certain ways of living and philosophies people have on life.
Yeah, I mean, he talks about a litany of very tough, difficult things, and this is happening well before it ends up in like the cultural zeitgeist. Like if you look at the song, which was released in 2012, I think many of the things discussed in it, now perhaps this is because I was much younger at the time and wasn't involved in as many conversations as I am now. But I do think many of the things that he discusses in the song are looked into and taken far more seriously nowadays than they were back then.
Yeah, so like here's an example. I'm kind of pulling up. There's kind of two parts to the song. At first he's kind of talking to men who are like, I just want to make it all. I want to make money. I want to live my life. And then the second half of the song he's kind of talking to women. But there's this section at the end of where he's talking to men and he says, you want to succeed, you have to try, or one day you'll get older and regret it all because you can't provide. Your friends are lowlifes, don't act surprised. Just cut the bad fruit off the tree, make the sacrifice. I mean, it's talking about, like, you need to shift your philosophy on life. Like, he's calling out people who are just, I don't know, living terribly. Like,
well, I think here's another thing. Like, at this point in time, 2012, I think the whole thing about the 5 closest friends that you have to you tend to be what you end up being like, right? You're the culmination of your 5 closest friends.
Yeah.
But I think another productive thing to highlight here is that while that may be known to certain groups of people who are studying psychological literature, let's say, it's not necessarily known to the general masses. So when he comes in and he talks about, like, your friends are lowlifes, don't act surprised, you have to cut them out. Like, that brings that message to a whole new audience, and it makes it far more accessible to people, right? Like, in your daily life. I think there's a real kind of practical knowledge that oftentimes I see existing in rap music. And I think that's part of the reason why I tweeted this at one point regarding hip-hop and rap. I said, I think it really resonates with men regardless of upbringing, race, socioeconomic status. And I tweeted the meme, me listening to gangster rap on my way to work. And it's, like a typical business dude just sitting behind the wheel of his car.
In his car.
Yeah. But the
with
part of the reason,
suit on, just a slight smile.
But part of the reason that resonates with people is because it's this kind of practical knowledge that I think oftentimes the cultural elites are unwilling to recognize. And I think that's the same exact thing that we see with, like, Joe Rogan's podcast, the Joe Rogan Experience.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You can have all sorts of issues with Joe Rogan, his podcast, with rap music, all of that. But I don't think that you can deny that what these art forms do is they take concepts that maybe were previously inaccessible to someone and they boil them down and they make them digestible to the masses. And I think oftentimes they hone them in or are first to them.
Or they're talking about things that are like, you're not supposed to talk about this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people like to hear people talking about things that you're not supposed to talk about because you're not really hearing people talk about it.
I think maybe that's why, at least it seems to me, like, comedy is getting more and more popular now. Because you have comedians who can go out there and say those things that you're not supposed to say. Right? Like, think about how popular Dave Chappelle's Sticks and Stones got.
But then you also have this reactive group that's kind of trying to shut down some of that dialogue or I don't know, quote unquote cancel people, right? Like, Dave Chappelle isn't okay anymore because he says the things you're not supposed to say, but that's what comedy has always been.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Making jokes about things that you don't joke about. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's part of what comedy is. I mean, it depends on your niche in comedy, but
yeah,
there's something that draws people to, like, these jokes that you're not supposed to say that. Like, what's Louis C.K.'s bit about of course, but also,
Oh, yeah,
you know,
yeah.
it's just, he's like, yeah, of course these things, but also, and he says something that it's like, oh, you can't say that, but it's really funny.
But I think part of the reason why people are drawn to that is because there's truth to it. Like, think about in Sticks and Stones, Dave Chappelle's talking about like the LGBT, that whole thing. Okay, and he humorously refers to them by the letters. He calls the whole group the letter people, but says, yeah, but they don't all think the same, right? And here's how they kind of view each other. But he's saying what you can't, even though it's true. And part of the reason it resonates with people is because everyone kind of thinks that a little bit under the surface. But then that way that he's talking about it, or the way that somebody raps about it, compresses it and makes it more real when it's said out loud in a very well articulated way. And I think what's so funny about these is there's a big pushback from the purported experts in these fields. Right? Like, most people would think that Joe Rogan wouldn't be a super popular individual because, like, he's not highly educated, right? He doesn't do a lot of research. You would think that everyone would want to go to the experts.
Yeah, but he's relatable. Like,
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
that's part of it. Like, he represents the way that a lot of people think. And he thinks about things and asks questions and ponders ideas. And I think people can relate to that.
Yeah, and I think that relatability, taking those concepts and putting them on this real, relatable, to some degree, emotional level, is critical for any idea to catch on. It doesn't catch on when it sits in the highly intellectualized circles. And oftentimes, I would argue, when it sits in those circles, it's not refined enough. Because if you can't communicate something in plain English, if you can't communicate it in very simple terms,
Yeah.
I think you're probably missing something serious.
That
here.
is always a good test. Like, can you explain this to a 5-year-old? And you're saying, like, a lot of times rap, you see it as taking these complex concepts or ideas or difficult issues and putting it in a way that's relatable, easily understandable. It's concisely communicated. You know, in these rhymes or these lyrics that people are able to craft together.
Yeah. And it makes it more relatable. Like you said, part of the reason people are drawn to Joe Rogan is because on some level he's relatable, right? Like, he's a comedian. He was a host of Fear Factor.
Oh,
He's
I
a
missed that
UFC
show.
announcer. In all of these situations, what he does is he acts like a normal person would. Like, I don't know if you've heard him talk about his like interview or demo for doing Fear Factor, but apparently, as he tells the story, everybody else went in and took it as this super serious, like, ooh, the factor of fear, how are people going to do? Like, that was the energy that most people came in with. And he said he went in and he just acted like an announcer and like a normal person, like, oh, this is wild, we're gonna have people do these crazy things, and that was it. He didn't try and make it into something that it wasn't. He was just real.
Yeah.
And that's what people were drawn to. And I think that's similarly why, like you said, people are drawn to like rap music and his podcast and comedy, because they're these
It's raw and real.
real, relatable things. Like, people have those dark thoughts. Like, when you're on the highway and somebody cuts you off. Like, there's so many comedy bits about, like, just wishing some terrible thing happens to that person.
Bill Burr. He
Yeah.
does that a lot, yeah.
Oh, he's just ruthless with some of those things.
Yeah, but part of it is we laugh because we're all kind of thinking it in that moment, but you just had the courage to actually say it.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's funny.
I think oftentimes comedians or rappers, maybe part of the reason that they can come in and have this effect is because they are an outsider, right? Maybe that's a feature and not a bug, right? And that's why they can come in and come to a conclusion maybe faster or box things up in a more concise manner. You know, I almost feel like comedians and rappers, they're seen as unsophisticated by some of those intellectuals, by the cultural elites, because they're outsiders. But I think one of the things that they have that the other group, the elitist types, don't have is kind of like a street smarts or practical common sense. And when you walk into a new field with practical common sense, you're unacquainted with things, you have kind of like a deficiency of knowledge, right? And on one hand, that's kind of a negative. But on the other hand, it allows you to not necessarily make the exact same mistakes. So where somebody could have gotten hung up before, you're unlikely to be hung up in the same way, right? It's like a fresh set of eyes coming in, asking different questions. You know, I think this really came to a head with some of the COVID stuff, right? Like early on, we were told that COVID was super highly transmissible. We were told that it had arrived before March 2020, and it was a really severe virus. It was going to be a big problem. And I remember looking around and basically immediately calling like BS. Something here isn't right. And I'm not like an epidemiologist, and this is part of the reason that I think certain everyday people get really frustrated nowadays. Because some of these things, for those with practical or common sense, these things were clearly observable. Because what you would do is you just look around and you'd ask yourself, oh, so are people dropping like flies around me? Because if it's been here for a while, it's super duper transmissible, and people are
Deadly.
supposed to, and it's super deadly, then I should be seeing people dropping dead all around me. My age, kids, like that's what we should be seeing if this is true. But that's not what we saw. And I know people will sit here and go, oh, well, we didn't understand everything about it. We didn't understand all the nuances. You're right, but oftentimes you can just take a step back and look at some of these things and go, this doesn't really make sense. Right? Like with the Epstein stuff. Come on. People don't perpetuate the Epstein didn't kill himself meme because there was some bombshell report that came out with new additional information. No, you just look at the super basic high level facts and you go, this doesn't add up at all. I think comedians and rappers and just kind of like everyday lay people are perfect examples of outsiders. And when we bring in outsiders, I think it can help mitigate getting, like pigeonholed and losing track of things. Because sometimes we miss things when we think about stuff like one thing for too long, right? Like I've gotten into situations like this in engineering, right? You're looking at a problem for too long and you start overcomplicating it in your head.
Yeah, it's like what's that story about the toothpaste and the engineers trying to...
Yeah. The short of it is a toothpaste factory has instances where they're getting errors and problems because the toothpaste boxes don't have toothpaste tubes in them. The machine isn't doing it 100% of the time, and then customers get annoyed. So they hire this engineering firm, and they create a system where it'll stop the line so that an employee can come over and they can remove the box before it goes out if it doesn't have toothpaste in it. And it's this whole elaborate system.
Senses the weight.
Yeah, and they spend millions of dollars or whatever on this as the engineering parable, let's say, goes. They implement the fix, and for the first few weeks they see, oh look, we're catching all of these boxes. This is wonderful. It's awesome. Like, This is a success. And then after about a week or so, there's a sharp drop off in the number of boxes that are pulled, the number of alarms. It's gone to zero.
Number of line stoppages.
Yeah. And they start thinking, oh man, the system isn't working anymore. Something's wrong. We have to troubleshoot this new thing.
The system isn't stopping it for the empty boxes anymore.
Yeah. So we're going to have a bunch of empty boxes going out and unhappy customers. So they go back, and they're observing the line, and they see some of the workers just going about their day-to-day business have set up a fan on a bunch of boxes. And the fan is blowing over the line right before the toothpaste things hit the sensor. And on the ground, there are a bunch of empty toothpaste boxes. And the engineers realize, well, the people on the line took a fan, and the fan just blows off any box without the toothpaste in it because it's way lighter. And they do it before it hits the weighing station. And they did it because they got sick and tired of walking over to try and reset the system and remove a box from the line. So the laziness of the workers, the annoyance that they had, brought about a very obvious practical solution where...
And that's just one of those things where it's like, they're the ones who are doing the hands-on work every day.
Yeah.
Like, they're most familiar with the manufacturing line.
Yeah, they have a practical solution.
They have a perspective that it's more... I don't know what you want to call it, but it's just down to earth. Like, it's fundamental. It's in touch with reality, not, theoretical and engineering a creative solution and we're dealing with in this theoretical space kind of thing. It's like, no, we could just set up a fan and blow them over.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. There's really something to keeping yourself grounded in, like, the physical world. And I think you see kind of similar parallels with some of the people we were talking about before.
Well, we talked about this...
Comedians, rappers, Joe Rogan.
We talked about this on a previous episode when we were talking about white collar and blue collar workers.
Yeah.
And just there's something to be said for doing work that's physical.
Yeah.
And you're grounding yourself to something real. You're not getting yourself lost in concepts and ideas, but staying grounded in reality.
Yeah.
And that's something that, no matter what kind of profession you do or what your hobbies are or whatever, we kind of made the assertion that everyone should be doing something that grounds them in reality.
Yeah.
Whether that means doing projects around the home or doing something with your hands.
Yeah. I think for that reason, I get kind of leery, honestly, when there's an engineer that I see and they don't do anything like that. Because without it, I think things end up degenerating so quickly into the hyper-theoretical. Like, they end up making a design that's, like, impossible to manufacture.
Yeah.
Like a hole that goes down and then it turns 90 degrees in the middle of some block of metal. It's like, yeah, we can't make this, obviously.
Right. Well, yeah, that's what, like, me at my job, part of my job is I have to work with, as an in-between, between design engineers and manufacturing to make sure, like, are you designing something that is manufacturable? Because you can sit here and write up this concept, this design of what you want this product to be all you want. But if we can't make it, or if making it is going to have significant cost, or if we could alter the design in this way and significantly reduce the cost to manufacture it, you need to be working in unison, design and manufacturing. Design for manufacturability. That's a whole thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think this goes beyond just, like, engineering too, though, because I had a friend who got a business degree, right? Business, economics, something like that. And I was having a chat with him, and we were kind of talking about finances and things like that. And he said to me, yeah, I'm never going to buy a home. I'm always going to rent. And I asked, like, oh, why is that? Why would you only ever rent? And he said to me, Well, renting is always cheaper than buying once you factor in like the cost of upkeep and maintenance and all of these things. You know, renting is always cheaper in the long run, and I can take that extra money and invest it in the market, and that's always going to be
X
a better return.
returns, yeah.
And that's always going to be a better return than whatever I could have done, putting that money into a house. And I thought about this for a little while. Like, this is obviously wrong, but I don't know how to express exactly how. And then it dawned on me. I just asked him, okay, so why do people rent out homes?
Right, why does anyone
Because
own a home? And who's going to own the homes that you rent?
Because it's one thing if you said, oh, well, some people own homes, but why would somebody rent out a place? Because that means they likely already own a place, and they're owning the second place with the express purpose of renting it out. So you would need to contend that these highly well-off, wealthy individuals are all losing money to rent out something, which is hassle as well, and that they continue to do this for years on end because they're just so stupid. And he looked at me just kind of confused, and he was like, oh, huh. And he thought about that for a minute, and he went, oh, yeah.
If that's really the universally best option, who's owning the homes that you're renting? Like, who's owning property?
Who owns everything?
Are you a socialist now? Like, just the government owns? Like, I don't know what you're...
But he just got so wrapped up in, like, the theory of, oh, well, if I can put money in the market and I can get these percentages and I can always... He got so wrapped up in that, and threw everything else, risk and common sense and logic, all of that out the window. And I think that's what happens when we get too pigeonholed in things and we don't ground ourselves in reality by doing something physical.
I also think when you don't talk to different people and get diversity of perspectives on things, like if you're a business guy and you're always just around business people, or you're an engineer and you're always just around engineering people, or you're a philosopher and you're always just around philosophy people, like maybe there's really something you could learn from someone outside of that circle. And I think that's part of why it's important not to get yourself into, an echo chamber and just talking to the same kinds of people.
Yeah, I think we really got to listen to people with that, like, practical knowledge, those street smarts, right? And I think it's really emblematic in the artist side of things, too. Because they're taking those concepts and just boiling them down into, like, the most simple form. Different in every single type of art form, right? Comedy is different than rap, is different than painting, but all of these art forms are kind of boiling down the concept into something easily digestible. I think because of this, we should integrate artists and comedians and rappers and things like that into our thought processes. I kind of jokingly responded, but only half jokingly, with rap lyrics to serious tweets. But I think that we should be doing stuff like that more often. It should be something that comes more naturally, because those things do speak to general truths. That's what art does at its core. And they oftentimes hold more knowledge that's kind of untainted by echo chambers and excessive pontification by folks in a specific field. And I think that can really aid us going forward. I think people instinctively understand this. That's why they're drawn to these things, even if it's not a big part of their culture, right? Even if you're the white-collar dude, you're listening to that rap music when you're driving into work. It seems like a weird intersection, but I think it actually makes a lot more sense than people realize. Well, with that, it's getting late. But recently, I've been kind of thinking about different things that are or aren't discussed in the church. Some things are frequently discussed, like how exactly do we balance between truth and love? That's a frequent message in churches. But one thing that I haven't really heard a great message on, that I haven't heard discussed frequently, is disgust. And when I say disgust, I mean like the synonym for revulsion, right? Something that is distasteful, something that you have an aversion to. I'm not totally sure how we are to handle that, because on one hand, it's this kind of natural feeling, and certain things should be disgusting to us, like sinful things should be disgusting. But on the other hand, it's not really clear how we are to balance that with our response. How do we have disgust for something, have that level of aversion, but not be judgmental, let's say? Because sometimes you have a disgust towards something that you're unable to articulate, right? This gut feeling. And I think that we're given that for a reason. And we shouldn't toss that by the wayside, but we also shouldn't be judging people. So it's a really tough line to kind of toe, and I would love to hear a message on that discusses that a little bit more in depth and helps resolve a kind of odd dichotomy there. But that's just what I've been musing about recently. If there's a great message that you've heard on disgust, or if you have any other thoughts, feel free to send us an email at secondpartypodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. With that, thank you again for listening, and have a good night.